sewing friends, welcome to my sewing room. My name is Beth and it's nice to be with you today. Today I'm working with red and green, some of my favorite colors that really go together nicely. This is a trip around the world. Someone requested this pattern and I put a quilt together, a smaller quilt, a picnic size quilt, and it even has some picnic type fabric in here. This watermelon fabric is so pretty. I'm happy to use it in this quilt. It's been waiting for the right quilt. So I just took some 3-inch wide strips. I have a selection of red and greens, and then I have a couple of strips of white. I have 7 fabrics, actually 5 fabrics and 2 whites, and that's what made this quilt. It's pretty easy to put together, so let's get started. Here's my pretty watermelon fabric. I'm starting with this one, just straightening the edge, and I will be cutting 5 different colored strips using 5 different fabrics, I should say, and I needed for my quilt top about 2.5 strips per fabric, so I just cut 3, and I will cut 3 strips of every fabric that I need, and then I'll line them up. So in this little clip I only cut 2, but I did end up needing some more. So I used that watermelon fabric, some red stripe, and I continued until I had my 3-inch wide strips cut the width of the fabric. And then I laid them out, kind of figuring out how I was going to mix them up a little bit. I wanted that white to be at least 2 strips away from the other white so that I didn't have whites together, and then just mixed up the red and the green. This is a very fun color palette that I enjoy working with. Once I had them all laid out, I sewed them together in order. Those long strips, I sewed them all together. After getting all my strips together, I folded that whole piece of, let's call it fabric, together, and then I made a tube. I sewed right sides together, and there's my tube of strips. Then I folded it in half and gave myself a straight edge on the left and went across and cut my strips 3 inches. Now as you go along, sometimes it gets off kilter and it isn't quite straight. So once in a while when you're doing this process, you need to straighten that left edge. Line up your ruler with your seams and make sure you're cutting straight across, and you'll end up with, you'll need 7 of these little tubes for each quadrant of your quilt. So there'll be 7 times 4 is 28. You'll need 28 to begin with, 28 of these, and then you'll need 4 more. So actually you'll need 32 eventually, but we're going to just simplify and think about the 7 that we need for each quadrant. So I ripped one end open, it really doesn't matter where, and then I needed to figure out where I'm going to take the seam out. So I laid it down to see where the squares needed to be. You just need to think about that round the world pattern, and the squares need to alternate and make that diagonal line through there. And there you can see that's the beginning. So now I'll need to figure out as I go along where to pull or where to rip the seam out so that my strip of squares matches. And I'll go along and do this for my 7 strips of squares. So I have my 7 strips of squares ready to go, and now I just need to sew them together. And I will need to do this 4 times, but each of these sets of squares needs to be exactly the same. So I just need to make 4 of these, and then I will start putting it all together. Here are my 4 sets of squares, and I thought I would use this red square for the middle, but when I laid my strips out, it wasn't quite right. It needed, since I had a red right there next to it, I ended up using a white in the middle, a white polka dot, which is kind of fun. A different fabric than I had been using in this quilt. So I need 4 more strips for these centers here, and I waited until I had my quadrants ready to go. I laid them out, and then I figured out the placement for the last 4 strips of squares. Now I have it ready to go, and then I adding this little clip because if you want to make your quilt bigger using the same fabrics, you can make more of those quadrants of squares and it grows your quilt. Now I'll sit down at the machine and I will put these pieces together, pinning as I go, and before you know it, we'll have a quilt top. This quilt pattern is a favorite of mine, and like I said, I love this red and green. So I hope you're able to make one of these trip around the world quilts, make it any size, and thanks for sewing with me today. I will see you next time.